Shalom Hadavarniks. Welcome to Hadavar Messianic Ministries and our School of Biblical and Jewish Studies. We're studying Messianic Prophecy, Rabbinic and Messianic views, and we're in the Supplementary Prophecies section of the class, and this is session number 23. So let's go ahead and review where we were in session 22. Now in session 22 we were still in the prophets, and we were looking at Jeremiah 23 verses 5 and 6, where the Messiah will be our righteousness. As far as the overview goes, this is a literal prophecy with a literal fulfillment, and as far as the New Covenant usage goes, this is a second coming prophecy. We looked at the exposition of the key text, and we started in the prophet's present time, chapter 23 verses 1 and 2, and then we jumped to the kingdom in verses 3 through 8. As we looked at the material, we came across the branch motif again, and so we summarized the branch motif. The branch will be a servant, he'll be a man, he'll be a king, and he'll be God. In Jeremiah 23 verse 5, we saw that the branch was associated with David and the Davidic covenant. And so we looked at the Davidic covenant, and we ended up summarizing it as a succession of kings will always govern the nation of Israel, culminating in the Messiah. That's a long sentence, one sentence summary of the Davidic covenant. We also saw that all the nations would be gathered to it, to Jerusalem. All nations would go up to Jerusalem to celebrate the Messianic kingdom and to visit the Messianic king and enjoy his just and righteous rule. And that's exactly what verse 5 says. He will do justice and righteousness in the land. We also saw that in his days Judah would be saved and Israel would be secure, and he'd receive a name. The name is the Lord our righteousness. And all four letters of God's personal name, Yahweh, are included in that name, the Yud-He, Vav-He. In verse 7, we learned that the exodus out of Egypt would no longer be the high point of Jewish history. The high point of Jewish history would now become when Israel was regathered out of the Northland and from all the countries where we had been scattered. In other words, from a worldwide dispersion. At point C, rabbinic support, we asked the question, is Jeremiah 23, 1 through 8 Messianic in nature? And we looked at the Judaic Classics Library. We found that Bamidbar Rabbah states that this section is Messianic in nature. We went to Tom Huckle's book, and he put forward Targum Jonathan, which agreed that this was Messianic in nature, as did the Talmud, Baba Batra 75b, and the Midrash Rabbah, Lamentations 1, 16 and 51, the Babylonian Talmud, Barachot 12b. All of these sections of rabbinic writings agree that this is Messianic in nature. We then went to the Sefaria website, and we looked at the Midrash, and we saw that Midrash Mishlei 19 says that this is Messianic in nature. Additional support came from Rabbi David Kimke and Midrash Echa and Midrash Tehillim and Rabbi Moses Al-Sheikh. And I finished by recommending you pick up the work HaMashiach by Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum. As far as the fulfillment of Yeshua goes, this was fulfilled in Matthew 1, 21 to 23, where we saw that Yeshua would be given a second name that describes him as God, Emmanuel, God with us, just as Yavi Tzidkenu, the Lord our righteousness, describes him as being the God-man Messiah. And then Luke 1, 31 to 33, Yeshua will reign on the throne of his father David and over the house of Jacob forever. That's something human kings cannot do. Romans 3, 21 through 26 associated the Messiah with righteousness, as 1 Corinthians 1:30, and as did 2 Corinthians 5:21. Then we finished up by looking at Jewish positions and objections. The Soncino books of the Bible on Jeremiah put forward the idea that this is a Messianic prophecy, and we would totally agree with that. And that God is the source of the righteousness, and we would totally agree with that. But then a little difference. Point 3, our position number 3. The name means the Lord will justify, that is, vindicate us. This is Rashi and Metzudat David's position. And position number 4, the name means the righteousness of the Lord is with us. So rather than admitting the fact that the text says that the name of the Messiah will be Yahweh Tzidkenu, they tried to turn the name into a sentence speaking of what the Lord will do for us. So it's kind of a way to get around the impact of the name Yahweh Tzidkenu. Additional objection number 1 is that the name does not identify the God-men, because it's not unusual to use God's name as part of a person's name. So why make such a big deal out of this instance? And the big deal is the fact that all 4 letters of God's personal name are used in Yahweh Tzidkenu, the Yud, He, Vav, He. And that's not the case in Isaiah's name, Yeshayahu, or Jeremiah's name, Yirmiyahu, or any other name. These names do have the theophoric elements, the Yud, He, and the Vav, but they don't have the final He. In the complete, full, unabbreviated personal name of God is never used in relation to a person. However, the Messiah is given a name that applies to God alone. This indicates that God will become a man. Now, there's another additional objection, number 2, and that was voiced in this way. Well, Yeshua never went by this name, and that's easy to respond to. This is his descriptive name. This is a descriptive name for Yeshua, not his formal name. His formal name is Yeshua. So our conclusion, Yeshua is the Messiah named the Lord our righteousness. And the summary, the Messianic King will be the God-man. And the Messiah will be our righteousness. Well, this moves us on to the next prophecy in the prophets. Now we move on to Micah 5:2 for our new material. In Micah 5:2, we learn the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem of Judea. Now the overview, this is a blend prophecy. The pre-existence, the first coming, the tribulation, and the second coming of the Messiah and the Messianic kingdom are all combined together and blended together in such a way you don't see the time gaps between these events. It's a literal prophecy with a literal fulfillment, and it also covers the Messiah's complete career. Now the background. The background is the book of Micah. And Micah's theme is the condemnation and consolation of Israel. Now the condemnation of Israel is found in chapters 1 through 3, and the consolation of Israel in chapters 4 and 5. Now we're going to look more deeply into chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 5 deals with the Messianic program. And then chapter 4, 6 through 5:1 deals with the Messianic people. And chapter 5, 2 through 15 deals with the Messianic person. So let's take a look at chapter 5, verses 2 through 15 in a little more detail. His origins are stated in 5:2a and 5:2b. His relationship to Israel in chapter 5, verse 3a. And the results of this relationship in chapter 5, verse 3b through 4. So here are the time frames of Micah. We start out in the tribulation in chapter 5, verse 1. Then in chapter 5, verse 2, we jump to the first coming. And then in the middle of chapter 5, verse 2, we jump to the distant past. And then from verse 2 to verse 3, we go back to the first coming. And in the middle of verse 3, we jump over another couple thousand years over to the kingdom. So that's all the time frames we'll see in the book of Micah. So let's go to our exposition of the key texts. And we're going to start out in chapter 4, verse 9 through chapter 5, verse 1. So in chapter 4, verse 9 to 5:1, we are getting a glimpse at the tribulation that will occur before the final restoration of Israel. Travail will precede the kingdom. And that travail is detailed in verses 9 and 10. Now, why do you cry out loudly? Is there no king among you? Or has your counselor perished, that agony has gripped you like a woman in childbirth? Writhe and labor like in birth, give birth, daughter of Zion, like a woman in childbirth. For now you will go out of the city, dwell in the field, and go to Babylon. There you'll be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. All right, as I said, travail will precede the kingdom. As we looked at verses 9 and 10, we saw there's no king in Israel, and that's a sign of divine displeasure. And then Israel is experiencing travail. That's birth, the symbol of birth. And it's a symbol of Israel in the tribulation before giving birth to the glories of the kingdom. And that's also described for us in Jeremiah 30, verses 4 through 7. Now these are the words which the Lord spoke concerning Israel and concerning Judah. For thus says the Lord, I have heard a sound of terror, of dread, and there's no peace. Ask now and see if a male can give birth. Why do I see every man with his hands on his loins? You know, a man can't give birth, so why is he acting like it? Why is he in pain like that as a woman in childbirth? Why are the soldiers like this? Why are all their faces turned pale? Where's the courage? Alas, here comes the explanation. For that day is great, and there's none like it. It is the time of Jacob's distress, but he will be saved out of it. So it's a time of Jacob's trouble or Jacob's distress. Various different translations render it that way. Jacob's distress or Jacob's trouble is a title for the tribulation. So it'll be a time of great distress upon Israel, but he will be saved out of it. And there are two cities. We know there are two cities from which Israel will specifically be saved. The first one is Babylon, which is the world capital during the tribulation. Babylon is the religious, political, and economic capital of the world at that time. And she will be destroyed by God. And the destruction of Babylon is in Revelation 18. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. For she became a dwelling place of demons, and a prison of every unclean bird, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. So she is the economic capital of the world, the merchants of the earth. She is the political capital of the world, mention of the kings of the earth. So they're all empowered by Babylon and made rich by Babylon. And then comes the warning to the Jewish people, the call to the Jewish people. I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues, for her sins have piled up as high as the heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. So the Jewish people will come out of Babylon, the world capital. But the Jewish people will also be rescued from Jerusalem. There'll be Jewish people captured in Jerusalem, and that's discussed in Zechariah 14, verses 2 through 5. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. So this is a worldwide in scope. And the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half the city exiled. But the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fights on the day of battle. In that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east. And on the Mount of Olives will be split in its middle from east to west by a very large valley, so that half the mountain will move toward the north and the other half toward the south. And you will flee by the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains will reach to Azel. Yes, you will flee, just as you fled before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord, my God, will come, and all the holy ones with him. And so there will be a rescue out of Jerusalem as well. Now at this point we come to chapter 4 and verse 11, and our focus now becomes the campaign of Armageddon. And in chapter 4, verse 11, we get a glimpse at the many nations. And now many nations have been assembled against you who say, Let her be polluted. Let our eyes gloat over Zion. So again, this is worldwide in scope, so it's the tribulation period. And the full extent of the gathering is explained in Zechariah 12 and also repeated in Zechariah 14. So here's Zechariah 12, 2 and 3. Behold, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the peoples around. Again, this is worldwide in scope. And when the siege is against Jerusalem, it will also be against Judah. It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. And there it's very clearly stated that this is worldwide in scope. And then we've already looked at Zechariah 14, but let's take a look at it again. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord when the spoil will be taken from you and divided among you. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half the city exiled. But the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. So all these nations are going to gather around Jerusalem to try and annihilate the Jewish people once and for all. And then as we come to verse 2, we see that God has a purpose for this gathering. Verse 12. But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord, and they do not understand his purpose, for he has gathered them like sheaves to the threshing floor. So in verse 12, God's purpose for the gathering is to destroy them, to thresh them. And what's the picture here? Well, the picture is that of threshing, and the grain is gathered and harvested and piled up in a huge pile on a flat area, and then it's arranged in a circle all around the central mound, and a threshing sledge is then run over that grain around and around and around and around, and the sledge crushes the chaff and frees the grain and allows it to be harvested. Now here's another threshing floor, another view. You can see this man on his personal threshing sledge, and his cows there are drawing him over the grain around and around and around, totally pulverizing the chaff, but freeing the grain to be harvested. Now here's a picture of a one-man threshing sledge. A man would stand on that to provide weight, and you can see the bottom of the sledge to the bottom of the sledge is attached rocks or metal or anything like that to help pulverize the chaff. Now here's a threshing sledge that I photographed at Na'ot Kedumim a number of years ago, and the Na'ot Kedumim guide is holding it up to show us the sharp metal objects that are placed in the bottom of that sledge. And so that is pulled over the grain and totally pulverizes it. And that's the picture of what's going to happen to the armies of the Antichrist. They will be threshed. How'd you like to have that thing pulled over you? They'll be threshed the way a threshing sledge pulverizes the grain. And so the means of destroying the armies of the Antichrist is going to be the Messianic people. Oh, by the way, here's Israel's army. Israel's army is pictured as the threshing sledge. Micah 4:13, arise and thresh, daughter of Zion. For your horn I will make iron, and your hooves I will make bronze, that you may pulverize many peoples, that you may devote to the Lord their unjust gain, and their wealth to the Lord of all the earth. So there'll be great, great losses inflicted on the Antichrist armies. But as we come to chapter 5, verse 1, nevertheless, Israel will lose and needs to be rescued. Verse 1, now muster yourselves in troops, daughter of troops. They have laid siege against us. With a rod they will smite the judge of Israel on the cheek. And note again that the leader of Israel is not a king, it is a judge. And this is not a reference to the last king, King Zedekiah. This is a shofet, a judge, and this is happening during the tribulation period. And the fact that he's smitten shows that this judge is going to fall. He's not going to be successful. And this means this is not a Messianic prophecy, because when Yeshua comes as judge, he's going to judge the world, and no one is going to stand against him. So this is a human judge during the tribulation who's leading Israel, and he will fall. He will fall in the battle. So, in summary, all the nations will come against Jerusalem in order to destroy them, destroy the Jewish people. But God's plan is to bring them to Jerusalem to destroy the Antichrist armies. So they'll suffer great losses at the hands of the Jews, but Israel will fall nonetheless. So the section ends kind of badly. Israel will need to be rescued. And this is a kind of a bad chapter break here in the English. The Hebrew chapter break is much better. Chapter 5 in the Hebrew starts in the next verse. So we're in chapter 5, verse 1 in the English, in the tribulation period, but now we jump back a few thousand years in verse 2 to the first coming, and we get a look at the Messianic person. Now, the two origins of the Messianic person will be stated in this verse. His human origin in chapter 5, verse 2a. But as for you, Bethlehem Ephratah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth for me to be ruler in Israel. So the human origin of the Messiah will be in Bethlehem, and he goes forth for me, that is, to fulfill the purpose of God. And now, right in the middle of the verse here, we jump from the first coming all the way back to the distant past and the divine origin of the Messiah. We looked at his human origin in the first part of the verse. Now we look at his divine origin in verse 5-2b. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. So the point here is that the Messiah pre-existed the creation. He was in existence before the world was formed. And these are the strongest Hebrew terms for eternity past in this sentence. And very similar words are used of God himself. For example, Psalm 90, verse 2. Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And that describes the Messianic person, from everlasting to everlasting. And then Proverbs 8, 22 and 23. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, before his works of old. From everlasting I was established, from the beginning, from the earliest times of the earth. So the point is that the Messiah's existence precedes his physical birth. He existed before he was born as a man, before his human origin. And the fact that the Messianic person would be both human and divine is stated in other sections of Scripture. For example, Isaiah 9, 6 and 7. For a child will be born to us, that's his humanity, a son will be given to us, and from here on his deity is mentioned. And the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called, and these names only can apply to God, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. So we see that the Son who is given to us is deity as well as humanity. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. So this is more than any human king can do. He must be human and divine. And this will happen because the zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. This is guaranteed. This Messianic person will come and he'll perform this service, this ministry, this function, this program, and he will succeed because God is emotionally invested in his success. Now as we jump to chapter 5 and the first part of verse 3, we look at his relationship to Israel. We jump from the distant past in 5:2 all the way to the tribulation in 5:3, first half of the verse. Therefore he will give them up until the time when she who is in labor has borne a child. All right. He will give them up. That is the result of the rejection of the Messiahship of Yeshua by the Jewish leadership. Now, not every Jewish person rejected Yeshua. There were thousands who owned him as Messiah. But officially, the Jewish leadership did reject Yeshua when he came as Messiah. And when they did that, Yeshua separates himself from Israel until, and there's a key word there, see it underlined, until Israel's national regeneration. Until the travailing, the pains of birth have finished up. So until the end of the tribulation period, he will give them up until the end of the tribulation period. And that word until is very important because he shows that this is a time period. The giving up of Israel is a limited time period. And so this nullifies the big mistake of replacement theology, which says that the church has replaced Israel for all time, and that the Jewish people are just set off to the side. They're just another ethnic group, and the church receives all the blessings of God. Well, no. Replacement theology is wrong there, because this time period where God gives up Israel is limited. It's limited from the first coming until the end of the tribulation. And of course, his reference there is back to chapter 4, verses 9 and 10, Israel going through the tribulation, the travail of tribulation, the labor that she's going through. But at the end of the tribulation, Israel will be saved through the Jewish leaders calling on Yeshua to return. Just as the Jewish leaders rejected the messiahship of Jesus, at the end of the tribulation, the Jewish leaders will accept the messiahship of Yeshua. And this is found in Matthew 23, verses 37 to 39. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. So that's the rejection of the messiahship when he came and ministered in the first century. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. That's the punishment of this sin, the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem. For I say to you, and now the time period, for I say to you, from now on, from the first century, you will not see me until, there's that key word, until the time period ends. You will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So at the end of the tribulation, the Jewish leadership will cry out the great Messianic greeting recorded here in Matthew, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. They'll call Yeshua back, will beg for Yeshua to return, and he will. So again, remember that time period is temporary, and that little word until is very important, not only in Micah 5, but in Matthew 23. All right, now the results of Israel's turn, is it found in verse 3b through 4, and now we jump again, another time frame jump. We jump into the second coming and the kingdom. And so during the second coming and during the kingdom, we'll see the unification of Israel in Judah. Verse 3b. Then, okay, after the word until is fulfilled, then the remainder of his brethren will return to the sons of Israel. So there will be a united nation once again. And there'll be neither a northern kingdom or a southern kingdom or a dispersed kingdom. Just be one kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. And then we get a glimpse of the administration of the Messiah over Israel in verse 4. And he will arise and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will remain, because at that time he will be great to the ends of the earth. So Yeshua will be ruling and feeding like a shepherd. He'll be ruling and feeding with justice and righteousness and knowledge and understanding on a worldwide basis. This is worldwide in scope. Worldwide in scope. All right, that's as far as we're going to go in Micah chapter 5. So it's now time to ask the question, is Micah 5, 2 through 4 Messianic? So let's take a look at point C, rabbinic support. Do the rabbis think that this is Messianic in nature? Now we're going to start at the Sepharia website. And as we go to Sepharia, we see that Targum Jonathan to the prophets sees that this is Messianic, understands this to be Messianic. O you, O Bethlehem, Ephratah, you who were too small to be numbered among the thousands of the house of Judah, from you will come forth before me the Messiah. So Jonathan paraphrases and adds in who he understands this individual to be. From you will come forth before me the Messiah, to exercise dominion over Israel, he whose name was mentioned from before, from the days of creation. So Jonathan sees this as messianic. Now, in his book, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, and this is written by Dr. Alfred Edersheim, and by the way, any material written by Alfred Edersheim is worthwhile picking up. It's a little bit dated archaeologically these days, but the rabbinic material is still the same. It's been around for thousands of years. And so he's done a fantastic job. It's a classic work, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. Dr. Alfred Edersheim, and by the way, he's a Messianic Jewish scholar, makes the same point, that this is Messianic in nature, and he refers the reader to Pirkei the Rabbi Eliezer. All right, so we go to Sepharia, and we go to Pirkei the Rabbi Eliezer, and we read, 7 things were created before the world was created. They are the Torah, Gehinnom, the Garden of Eden, the Throne of Glory, the Temple, repentance, and the name of the Messiah, or the Messianic person. Whence do we know that the name of the Messiah was pre-mundane, was prior to the creation? Because it is said, his name shall endure forever. Before the sun, Yinon, and Yinon is Hebrew for a shoot or a new branch, so you see why the branch motif is so important. Before the sun, Yinon was his name, and he's referring to Psalm 72:17. Yinon, before the world had been created. Another verse says, but thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, which are to be least among the thousands of Judah, from thee he shall come forth unto me, who is to be ruler over Israel, whose ancestry belongs to the past, even to the days of old. He's quoting Micah 5:2 here, the past, while as yet the world had not been created. So Pirkei the Rabbi Eliezer feels this is very messianic. Rashi on Micah 5:2, from you shall emerge for me, and he identifies that phrase as referring to the Messiah, son of David. And so Scripture says, quoting Psalm 118:22, the stone the builders had rejected became a cornerstone. And we would agree with that, that's for sure. But our sages state that from here we deduce that the son of David, the Messiah, that's a title for the Messiah, here we deduce that the son of David will not come until the wicked kingdom spreads over the entire world for 9 months. In other words, Rome is going to conquer the world and do so for 9 months. And then in relation to the phrase, and the rest of his brothers, he states, the brothers of King Messiah. So he sees this as messianic, that is, the rest of the tribe of Judah. So this is a Jewish king. The Messiah is a Jewish king. Then in regard to the phrase, until the ends of the earth, and they shall bring tribute to him, the Messiah, with horses and chariots. Then the Soncino books of the Bible, the 12 prophets, edited by Reverend Dr. Cohen. The introduction reads, chapter 5, a prophecy of the Messianic king and Israel's destiny among the nations. So he sees chapter 5 as messianic very clearly. Verses 1 through 5 are entitled The Messianic King. Then we read, this prophecy of the Messiah is comparable with the more famous shoot out of the stock of Jesse prophecy in Isaiah 11. See, we're referring right back to that branch motif again, aren't we? To hearten the people of their calamitous plight, Micah foretells the coming of one from Bethlehem, i.e., that is, from the house of David, the Messiah, who, in the strength of the Lord, will restore Israel to their land and rule over them in God's name in abiding peace. From the phrase Ancient of Days, or about the phrase Ancient of Days, he writes, it is possible that this phrase gave rise to the later Jewish doctrine that the Messiah existed in the mind of God from time immemorial as part of the Creator's plan at the inception of the universe. Now in the Talmud, the name of the Messiah is included among the 7 things created before the world was brought into being. Then in regard to verse 3 and the word abide, the Shanchino Books writes, securely and enduringly. He's going to abide securely and enduringly, for the Messiah's powers will extend to the ends of the earth. This is about the Messiah, and it's worldwide in scope. We totally agree. Going to the Sefaria website again, the Talmud, Yomah 10a, the Son of David, the Messiah. That's a Messianic title, remember. The Son of David will come only when the wicked kingdom of Rome spreads its dominance throughout the world for 9 months, as it is stated. Now, the wicked kingdom of Rome is the 4th kingdom of the book of Daniel, and it will devour the world, says the book of Daniel. So that's what they're talking about here. But they're limiting that domination over the world to 9 months. As it is stated, therefore he will give them up until she who is to bear has borne. Then the remnants of his brethren will return with the children of Israel. So they compared the domination by Rome to a pregnancy. He's quoting Micah 5:2 there. The duration of Rome's rule over the world will be the duration of a pregnancy, 9 months. Well, actually, that's not quite correct according to the book of Revelation, but the book of Revelation states it'll be 3.5 years. But the rabbis limit it to 9 months here. But our point is, this is messianic in nature, and lots of resources say so. Also in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 98b, Rav says the Son of David, that's the Messiah, will not come until the evil Roman kingdom will disperse throughout Eretz Israel for 9 months. As it is stated, therefore he will give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the remainder of his brethren shall return with the children of Israel. And of course he's quoting our verse, Micah 5:2. Once a period equivalent to a term of pregnancy passes, the redemption will come. So again, this is messianic in nature from a whole slew of different points of view. All right, let's look at point D, the fulfillment in Yeshua. All right, is this fulfilled in Yeshua? Well, we see it fulfilled in Matthew 2, verses 1 through 6. Now, after Yeshua was born in Bethlehem of Judea, that's where it said he'll be born, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he who is born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea. How did they know that? Well, for this is what has been written by the prophet. Well, our guy Micah. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. So Micah 5:2 is seen as fulfilled in Matthew 2, 1 through 6. Now this is a good time to review the 4 interpretive techniques that we talked about earlier. So let's run through this again just to refresh our understanding of the 4 interpretive techniques we can use to exegete the Scripture. And by the way, all 4 techniques are valid because all 4 techniques are shown by example in Matthew chapter 2. All right, let's start. We'll look at the rabbinic term, the usage, and the example. We start with the Peshat. The Peshat means the plain sense or the literal sense. When we run across a Peshat, we will call it a literal prophecy plus a literal fulfillment. An example is Matthew 2, 5, and 6, and the term prophet there is rendered in the singular. Now this is the most important technique according to the rabbis. They speak of this technique in the Talmud, and they write, a text cannot be taken from the meaning of its Peshat. Shabbat 63a, Yevamot 11b, and 24a. A text cannot be taken from the meaning of its plain sense, its literal sense. And then Aharon Feldman, in his book The Juggler and the King, states, the meaning, the simple meaning of the text is always true. The simple meaning of the text. Now, this is just another way of referring to our golden rule of interpretation. When the plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense, etc., etc. The most important sense is the Peshat, the plain sense, the literal sense. But that's not the only sense. The next technique is the Ramez. This is the allegorical and philosophical approach. When we come across a Ramez, we will call it a literal prophecy plus a typical fulfillment. And the example in Matthew is verse 15, again, where the word prophet is rendered in the singular. Now, what is a type? This is a typical fulfillment. What is a type? A type is a figure, a representation, or symbol of something to come, as an event in the Old Testament foreshadows another in the New Testament. That's a type. And so when we come across a Ramez, it's a literal prophecy plus a typical fulfillment. You can look at Matthew 2:15 for the example. The third interpretive technique is the drash. This is the agadic or homiletical or practical application of the text. So when we come across a drash, we will call it a literal prophecy plus application. And our example is Matthew 2:17 and 18. And again, the word prophet is rendered in the singular. And our final technique is the sod, or the mystical approach. When we come across a sod, we will call it a summation. And the example is Matthew 2:23. And there, the word prophet is rendered in the plural, prophets. Now, why is it rendered in the plural? Because Matthew is summarizing all that the prophets taught about the Messiah. All right, so here we have a Peshat, a literal prophecy plus a literal fulfillment. The prophecy said in Micah 5:2 that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, and we saw that, yes indeed, the Messiah was born in Bethlehem. As we continue on in our fulfillment in Yeshua, we come to Colossians 1:15 through 19. We read, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created." So not only did he precede creation, he was part of creation. He was the creator, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. They were created by him. All things have been created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church, and he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself might come to have first place in everything. For it was the Father's good pleasure for in all the fullness to dwell in him. So that's Yeshua. Not only did he predate creation, he is the creator. He that was the triune God. As part of the triune God, he is the creator. You know, there's a big debate in physics these days about it's impossible for us to look to before the Big Bang. You know, science has come to the understanding that our universe had a point of creation. It had a point of origin. But we can't look after or before that point of origin. Well, physically we can, but spiritually we can. We just got to look at it in Colossians 1:15 through 19. Whenever you see references to Yeshua as predating creation, you're getting a glimpse at the look of existence before our physical being and our physical world came into being. So we can look prior to the creation if we look into the Bible, something that physicists cannot do. All right, also John 17:24. There we read, "Father, I desire that they also whom you have given me be with me where I am, so that they may see my glory which you have given me, for you loved me before the foundation of the world." So the love of God existed before the foundation of the world. So scientists need to take that into account. It's nice to know that. All right, Jewish positions or objections. Are there other positions the rabbis feel that we should take rather than the position that Jesus is the Messiah? Well, we'll start in the Santino books of the Bible, the 12 prophets, again edited by Reverend Dr. Cohen. And he starts out by saying the verse is messianic. Remember this? Chapter 5 is summarized with this statement: it is a prophecy of the Messianic King and Israel's destiny among the nations. Right on. Right on. Verses 1 through 5 are entitled the Messianic King. Right on. We agree with that. Now, regarding the phrase the Ancient of Days, it is possible that the phrase gave rise to the later Jewish doctrine that the Messiah existed in the mind of God from time immemorial as part of the Creator's plan at the inception of the universe. In the Talmud, the name of the Messiah is included among the 7 things created before the world was brought into being. Now, our response. Now, Rabbi Goldman, he's the one who happened to write the Micah section of the commentary, is very close to the truth. He's very close. But he's not quite there. He's not quite there. The biblical doctrine is that the Messiah existed as the second person of the triune God from eternity past. The Messiah was not merely some thought in God's mind. His work of death, resurrection, and the establishment of the kingdom were part of the Creator's plan at the inception of the universe. His preexistence is stated in John 1:1 and John 1:14 and 8:58. The fact that he is God is stated in Hebrews 1:8, John 5:18, John 10:30-33, Philippians 2:6 through 11. And the Creator's plan is brought before us in Ephesians 1:4 and Revelation 13:8. So let's refine the rabbi's thinking a little bit here, huh? The Messiah did not exist merely in the mind of God from eternity past. Rather, the Messiah existed as God in the form of the Son of God, the second person of the triune God from eternity past. So while we agree with a lot of what the rabbi says there, we have to refine his thinking a bit. Second position, the verse is fulfilled in King Hezekiah. This is a favorite. Now, years ago, I was discussing this issue by email with an anti-missionary. Now, here is a response he sent to me. He wrote, "Again, I maintain that if Micah was prophesying, he was only saying that from the royal bloodline of David, who was born in Bethlehem, will come a ruler of Judah. Robert, you must know that during the period of Micah, he was trying to unite his people and tell them not to be afraid. That just like David, a king would save them from defeat. Robert, be honest. You know that, especially if you read Hebrew scriptures, that Micah was telling of King Ahaz's son, King Hezekiah. In Hebrew, meaning the mighty God, the Prince of Peace, the wondrous advisor, and the government was on his shoulders, as predicted in Isaiah chapter 9. Hezekiah was the king of the Jews. He was anointed, and there was peace in the land for many years. He was truly the Messiah." Robert, if you don't admit this, then you have not read Hebrew scriptures, and quit pretending that you have. Notice, he finishes by tossing the ignorance card my way. Now, this is a technique that anti-missionaries like to use. It's called an ad hominem argument. You attack the man. When you cannot defend your position, you attack the man and try to discredit the person who's presenting a different position. You don't deal with the position, you turn your attention to the man. Now, in debate, you lose the debate because you're not defending your position. You're attacking the man, and that's a total loss in debate. But we're not in a formal debate, and this is what the rabbis will do. So be ready for it. Be ready for the different types of cards they will toss your way. They'll toss all kinds of cards. Here he's tossed the ignorance card at me, but he could have tossed the Hebrew card. You don't know Hebrew the way I know Hebrew. He could have tossed the Holocaust card. Look at, you're siding with the Nazis. They believed in that stuff. You're siding with the people who killed the Jewish people. So then that's followed by the traitor card. You're a traitor to your own people. And that can be followed by the Jewish upbringing card. You know, if you were raised as a good Jew, you'd never believe anything like this. You know, you're a bad Jew. That's the other card. So those are the type of cards that the anti-missionaries are going to toss at you. They're going to try and distract you, get you off the subject, intimidate you. But, you know, just stick with the text. Just stick with the Peshat. Stick with the plain meaning of the text. And you can out-argue rabbis with both hands tied behind your back. You know, just stick with the text. But that's just an example of what can happen. All right. The second position, the verse is fulfilled in King Hezekiah. Sanhedrin 99a. This is a similar position to what the anti-missionary said. Rabbi Hillel said, "There shall be no Messiah for Israel, because they have already enjoyed him in the days of Hezekiah." There's the position. Our response: Hezekiah is not a good candidate for messiahship. Rabbi Joseph in Sanhedrin 99a would agree with us. Rabbi Joseph responded, "May God forgive him." In other words, may God forgive Rabbi Hillel for saying so, that Hezekiah was the Messiah. Hezekiah's reign did not last forever. Oh yeah, there was peace for maybe a few years, but it didn't go worldwide, and it never lasted forever. Hezekiah is not a good candidate for messiahship. All right, our conclusion. Yeshua is the God-man Messiah. And our summary, the God-man will be born in Bethlehem of Judah. All right, let's move on. I've got a few minutes here, so I think we can get into the introductory material in the book of Zechariah. So let's continue in Messianic Prophecies and the Prophets. We'll look at Zechariah 6, 12, and 13. The Messiah will be both priest and king. Now, our overview, it's a second coming prophecy, and the New Covenant usage, it's a literal prophecy with a literal fulfillment. And the background is 8 visions in the book of Zechariah. So let's summarize these 8 visions. Vision number 1 is God's sovereignty over Israel's restoration. God is angry with the Gentile nations, but mercy will be shown to Israel. Second vision, anger with the Gentiles over Israel's dispersion. Third vision, the restoration of Jerusalem. The 4th through 7th vision deal with preparation for the restoration. So let's take a look at those. Vision number 4 tells us about confidence in the priesthood. We'll have confidence in the priesthood again, a renewal of Israel's priestly ministry. Vision 5 produces confidence in civil authority. The Messiah will be the priest and king. Vision 6, there will be the removal of the sinner, the judgment for covenant disobedience. Vision 7, the removal of the sin, the return of wickedness to Babylon, which is its point of origin. And then point 8, Vision 8, this puts the cycle into action that will result in the Messianic kingdom, God's final and universal dominion. The section of Scripture begins in the prophet's present time, chapter 6, verses 9 through 11. And we see in verse 9 that the word of the Lord came to me, saying. The word of the Lord comes to Zechariah, and he's commanded to carry out a symbolic act. That act is mentioned in verse 10. Take an offering from the exiles, from Heldai, Tobijah, and Jedediah, and go the same day and enter the house of Josiah, the son of Zephaniah, where they have arrived from Babylon. So Zechariah is told to specifically go to some Babylonian returnees, and they are named Heldai and Tobijah and Jedediah, and meet them in the house of Josiah. And apparently he's going to take an offering from them. Verse 11. Take silver and gold and make an ornate crown and set it on the head of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. So apparently he takes an offering from them, and this offering is silver and gold, and he's to make crowns. And the word there is atarot. It is plural, 2 crowns. Some think it's some sort of a composite king's crown, 1 part silver and 1 part gold, perhaps interleaved, one on top of the other. But no matter what type of crown it is, 2 crowns or 1 crown, a crown is not the normal headgear for the priest. Now here's the high priest's mitre or headgear, according to Rashi, and the Hebrew there is a netzer. This is the headgear according to Rashi. It's not a crown. It's called a netzer, not a natarot or natara. And so they are to set them on the head of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak. So both crowns go on one man's head. Go on one man's head. And there's a debate over the word crown in the Jewish world. One side notes that the word crown is plural, atarot. Ot is the feminine plural ending, atarot, and says that 2 crowns are being made. One is silver for the high priest, one is gold for Zerubbabel, the political leader. However, others view the plural as descriptive of 1 crown. For example, the Targum paraphrases the verse, a large crown, and the NASB renders it an ornate crown. The Soncino commentary says that the 1 crown view is shared by many modern commentators. So no matter which way you take it, the point of the verse is the fact that the high priest is being crowned with the symbol of kingship. However, please note that Zerubbabel is not mentioned at all, only the high priest. The crown or crowns are destined for the high priest. The importance of this is that it runs contrary to the biblical norm. Under the Mosaic covenant, the office of king and priest had to be kept separate. The king was to be from the tribe of Judah and the Davidic dynasty, and the priest had to be from the tribe of Levi, Numbers 3:10 and 16:39 to 40. One was not to usurp the office of the other. An example is 2 Chronicles 26:16 and following. 2 Chronicles 26:16. But when King Uzziah, became strong, his heart was so proud that he acted corruptly, and he was unfaithful to the Lord his God, for he entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Then Azariah the priest entered after him, and with him 80 priests of the Lord, valiant men, and they opposed Uzziah the king and said to him, "This is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who were consecrated to burn incense. Get out of the sanctuary, for you've been unfaithful, and you will have no honor from the Lord God." But Uzziah, with a censer in his hand for burning incense, was enraged. And while he was enraged with the priests, the leprosy broke out on his forehead before the priests in the house of the Lord, beside the altar of incense. Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests looked at him, and behold, he was leprous on his forehead. And they hurried him out of there. And he himself also hastened to get out, because the Lord had smitten him. Now Uzziah's great power led to pride, which proved to be his downfall. Proverbs 16 and 18. Apparently he began to depend on men and weapons rather than on the Lord. He even presumed to offer incense in the temple, a sacrilege for which Azariah the priest and the 80 other priests roundly condemned him. He was unfaithful to the law, which limited this function to the priest. Uzziah responded in rage, but the correctness of the priest's rebuke was immediately evident when the king's forehead broke out with leprosy. This rendered the king ceremoniously unclean, and he had to leave the temple at once. And we pick it up, 2 Chronicles 26:21. King Uzziah was a leper to the day of his death, and he lived in a separate house, being a leper, for he was cut off from the house of the Lord. And Jotham his son was over the king's house, judging the people of the land. Now the rest of the acts of Uzziah, the first to last, the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amoz, has written, So Uzziah slept with his fathers, and they buried him with his fathers in the field of the grave which belonged to the kings, for they said, he is a leper. And Jotham his son became king in his place. So until the day of his death, Uzziah was leprous to such an extent that he had to be quarantined, and he had to yield the reins of government to Jotham his son. However, here in the book of Zechariah, we see both offices combined in one person. Those in the Jewish community who are disturbed by this unusual situation attempt to rectify it by taking the two-crown view. They want to maintain the separation between priest and king. The silver crown crowned the priest, the gold crown for the king. This is strictly speculation, as Zerubbabel is nowhere in sight. He's not mentioned. However, God is doing this to draw attention to this individual, and two lessons are present, one for the distant and one for the near future. So now we're ready to start into the exposition of the key text, starting in Zechariah chapter 6, verse 12. That's our text that we'll pick up next session. I think you'll find it fascinating and very interesting. So we'll see you next session in Zechariah chapter 6. Lehitraot. Lehitraot.